That's everyone with us. Welcome along to the 1 o'clock session, which is focusing on financing Scandia House self-build. An exciting subject. Have any self-builders that have done this before? Yeah, so I'm also a self-builder for my sins, and it is without a doubt one of the most rewarding things that I've ever done in terms of designing something that fits your family's needs. The choices that we have in the UK are predominantly held by 10 big house builders who build and you get to choose worktops and handles, or we do what many of us do, is buying a property and renovating it and tearing it apart and starting all over again and changing it. This is a great opportunity to design something as breathtaking as we're in here today. But finance is a really important part of it, and the journey and the position of when you should understand the finances is equally important. We've got lots of projects where the client comes along halfway through the build saying, can you help us get over the finish line? Often because budgeting's not been done too well to start with, or there's been overruns. So there's a well-trodden path in terms of the journey and the understanding, which all starts with the finance. Before you find a plot, lots of people today speaking to us about, would love to do this. How do we find the land? But importantly, you need to set the budget so that you understand how much you can allocate for land and how much you can allocate for the build. And then there's a chunk of professional fees and preliminary fees that we need to take into account as well. So the agenda I want to work through, hopefully you can see what's on screen. If not, I'm going to explain it anyway. The agenda starts with establishing the budget. How do we do that? We'll then look at working out costs, including those preliminary and professional fees that we have, potentially stamp duty, legal fees. The single most important thing, and the only word that you'll ever see in bold here, is cash flow. Cash flow on a build is the lifeblood of what makes it work and run in a smooth, timely fashion. Having the funds available at the right time is critical. And when we move to off-site production, which is the opportunity that you have here, the cash flow becomes more front-ended. So we really need to understand the payment schedules and payment terms, not simply for our superstructure manufacturer, but for our professional trades. So it's really important. And there are savings to be made. If you have the funds available at the beginning of key stages, and there are offers coming in the market, if you've got the funds available, you can take advantage of those offers. You know, I've done an exercise recently, and this is probably describing how sad my personal life is, but Googling of buying before the end of the month. So some of the major kitchen manufacturers with significant discounts if you can buy before a month end. Wicks of flooring and tiling, discounts if you can buy before the month end. You can only do that if you have the funds available. So we're going to focus on the cash flow to make sure that your project runs on time, is cash flow positive, and you can meet the payment terms for your professionals and suppliers. We'll look at arranging the funding because it's a slightly different marketplace than traditional high street lending. Well, I'm sure we've all arranged mortgages at one stage or another, but the high street banks aren't the stable place where we resource self-build mortgages. It has been for many years building societies. The clue's in the name building societies, it's why they were formed. And we have lots of building societies, more post-credit crunch than we even had pre-credit crunch. So the appetite from the lenders is significant, and we have more funding than we have build projects at the moment. So a really good time to be doing this. And in England, of course, we have the right to build legislation that was brought through in April 2016. For those of you looking for land, who's looking for a plot at the moment? So, plenty of you looking for land. Your local authority must now keep a register and maintain a register of people who want to build their own home. Register with your local authority, because within a 3-year period, for the number of registrants that are on that, they must grant sufficient planning permission to meet that demand. There's really exciting times down here between the right to build legislation and the support that Homes England have for enabling sites and developments. England's a really exciting time for self-build. So arranging funding, predominantly building societies, and we'll show you a bit about that. And actually, how do these self-build mortgages work? Why are they different to the vanilla mortgage that you've got off the shelf to buy a house that's across the road? So we'll examine how they work and what's different. And a bit about BuildStore, our background. This is come September, our 20th year of lending on self-build. And we'll give you a bit of an understanding of the support that we provide to the industry and to the lenders, importantly. And I'm sure we'll have plenty of time to deal with questions. Those of you that want to take some notes on key points, I don't think it would be too difficult for us to email out the presentation to those that wish a copy of that. But some of the key points that you want to take a note of, the three key elements that we need to be clear on is the budget, the total costs until practical completion. Total costs, not just your build costs, but your professional fees, your preliminaries, potentially stamp duty if you're buying your plot, site insurance, structural warranty. There's a raft of additional costs that you have with self-build that are unique against the normal house buying process. But there are also some significant advantages. And then we'll focus in on your cash flow to get an understanding of how this works. So how do we work out our budget? And when should we work out our budget? Well, we should do it at the earliest possible opportunity. Ideally before you start the design of your house, if you already own your plot, and certainly before you've went about the buying process, even if you've got sufficient funds to buy the land, because you need some clarity in terms of the total build costs. It's important we have responsible build costs. Coming in with a low build cost can distress the lender and have them concerned that the house might not be finished. So what are responsible build costs? And somewhere between £1,250 and anywhere up to £2,500 a square metre, depending on the quality of the internal finishing. From a 100 square metre house, you could spend £100,000 and you could equally spend £200,000 depending on specification. But it's important that those are responsible. So if we're looking for the land and we need to work out what we've got, well, quite clearly our liquid savings, and if we are going to borrow, how much will the lending institution allow me to borrow? So we can find that out at a nice early stage. I know from speaking to a number of you early on today, and self-build certainly has a challenge in changing the demographics down for the first-time buyers. There's a lot of people moving towards retirement who have a big old house that's often leaking like a sieve and is no longer fit for purpose because the kids have all left home, and it's expensive to heat and it's expensive to maintain. And there's the opportunity to then move to something that's perhaps more designed in line with their needs now and for the future. And importantly, if our income's about to reduce in retirement, it's a wonderful opportunity to reduce the running costs of our house and the maintenance costs of this house. So some of the off-site manufactured systems such as Scandia House can produce very thermally efficient to passive house level. If we can reduce the running costs by a couple of £1,000s a year, quite clearly that's a couple of £1,000s a year that you don't need in income. So if we have a big old house that's got lots of value in it, but perhaps we're income poor, or certainly less income than when we were working, that's a considerable asset, and there are products designed to release the equity from there to add to your savings. And if we can work that out at an early stage, it can set a clear budget. So it's really important at the start, if you're buying land, we work out what the budget is, because you need to allocate some for land, professional fees and build costs. Working that out is important because you've got some really talented design people in here. You want to be setting them an established budget for them to design the house to. We don't want a guesstimate, because there's nothing more frustrating than someone doing a talented set of drawings and you come and work out your budget afterwards and we tell you that you can't afford to build what you've just designed. Don't spend money on design and drawings and architects without having a clear budget. So let's find out what's there in terms of savings. If we have to borrow, how much can we borrow? And if we've got assets that we can release from, then let's find out a bit about them at an early stage. Start by knowing that before we find land or identifying land, or if we own the plot, before we go into design, set the budget with a healthy contingency. So what are the key things that impact on cash flow? Well, if you don't already own the plot, and we're going into that plot buying process quite clearly, securing your land or perhaps an old building that you plan to demolish and bring back up out the ground again is the starting point. In that land acquisition stage, one of the major benefits for self-builders is the stamp duty that you will pay will be on the purchase price of your plot, not the end value of the house. So that could be a considerable saving in a house this size and scale could have a considerable value. To buy it, the saving in the stamp duty is quite significant. And as a self-builder, you of course have the potential for a VAT reclaim on your building materials. So two major savings from a tax perspective. The fees we need to understand, because this is when the money starts to go out, and the fees need to come from your savings. Architects, designers, stamp duty potentially, planning, building regulations. We must insure the site, so we've got site insurance, and you want protection on the building longer term, so we have a 10-year structural warranty. So we need to start to think about what these professional fees cost, and that needs to come out the pot at the beginning, because most of these fees are paid up front. You'll also have the valuation to buy the plot, or if you already own the plot, we'll have the valuation to establish what it's worth and to understand what the value of the house will be when it's completed. That valuation process is really important because it tells us the reinstatement value of the house. And the reinstatement value, we need to put sufficient site insurance in place so that if the house is irreparably damaged before you move in, there's enough insurance to bring it to the ground and rebuild it back up to its finished position again. But the biggest investment you'll make, so make sure you've got sufficient site insurance and structural warranty. And now these all fall within the fees section at an early stage. The cash flow will definitely be influenced by the payment terms for your superstructure provider. There has been a huge swing from traditional brick and block in the UK. In Scotland it's always been timber frame, timber frame, and I can assure you it's definitely colder up there. There's been a move away from traditional brick and block down south, and the Structural Timber Association advises that about 75% of self-builders are using off-site timber manufacturing. Of course, it gives you the opportunity of a factory produced system where the materials aren't exposed to poor weather conditions. It certainly speeds up the build programme. You've got a whole house engineered system being produced in a factory, and of course the tolerances can be much smaller, which enable thermal efficiency. It's a whole house solution with Scandia House, which means if something goes wrong, you're not chasing lots of different trades to see who fixes something. You've got a whole house solution here, which is excellent. But what it definitely does is it brings your cash flow to the front end. Most off-site producers will take around 10% of the total project costs for the system to start the design phase. You will then make a payment during the construction phase, and then another payment for delivery. Now, those payments haven't added value to the site, so we need to make sure the funds are available at the right time to meet those payment schedules, because the last thing we need is the site not valuing up, you not receiving enough funds, and we can't release the system from factory. So this is the key component, is the cash flow, is how do we ensure that we can meet the payment terms, buyers and tradespeople. We need to understand those purchasing terms, invoice terms. The self-build community could be somewhere between the 4th or 5th biggest house builder in the UK. Therefore, we're contributing a considerable amount of funds to the economy and through builders merchants. You will be given the opportunity as a self-builder to open a builders merchant. you're effectively seen as a small developer, you can run a credit line with them, where you can order materials on the 1st of the month, pay for them on the 30th of the month, and then you've normally got 30 days to settle the account. So there's 60 days that you could have materials on site progressing the build before they're being paid. Now you need to make sure you can pay them on time, because they will go legal on you quickly if you don't. And of course, if you have the funds available where you don't have to run a credit line, you may be able to negotiate enhanced terms and discount your buying materials, which can be significant on a larger project. We certainly need to prepare ourselves for unexpected expenses. This is a very emotive thing. It's not like you're buying something off the shelf that you've done in the past. Designing your own home is an emotive process, and it can be easy to allow the budget to slip. It tends not to be a catastrophic blow on the budget. If it is, it tends to be the ground conditions. We can do lots about that when we're preparing a site through investigations. But if the site conditions are difficult, then it can run the budget out at an early point. The rest of it tends to be a gradual creep that takes place as we work through it, and as we start to see the house form, which changes from a bathtub to a jacuzzi, and it changes from a budget kitchen to a rather pretty designer kitchen. It's really important when we set the budget at the start that we try and keep our reins on it. So we can build in contingency if there is a gradual creep. And if you read many of the magazines, you know, in the UK, Build It or Home Building Renovation, Self-Building Design, they'll always talk about contingency. It should be somewhere between 10 up to 15% of your total project costs. And we certainly need to take on board your ongoing living costs. So if you have to borrow, we'll talk about it in terms of the changes to the mortgage market. And living in your own home, of course, is a nice advantage to have moving into your next new one. You should have to put stuff in storage, and that appeal of moving into rented or temporary accommodation. But if we do have ongoing rent or an ongoing mortgage, it certainly will affect how much we can borrow those that need to borrow. And I'm assuming you have to borrow the fact you're at a finance seminar, or this is a half hour of your life that you won't get back. So it's important that we understand what those outgoings are, because it can affect how much you can borrow depending on circumstances. That's why you have people moving in caravans on site, moving in with family or friends, because if you have no outgoings, it can increase the potential to borrow. I found from experience that there are a couple of renovation and new builds that you have to be careful of the choice. Caravan was one, in-laws was the other. One was a very cold experience and one was a caravan. So it's really important you make your choice carefully. Arranging the finance order. So we understand as a process we need to set the budget, and we've got a clear budget. We need to take away our professional fees. Then we're left with either what our build cost is or our land and build costs. We know that the cash flow is important. We know we build in contingency. So now we're starting to look at the supply. Where do we find these wonderful mortgages that can allow us to build our own home? The first line there says that it's limited in supply. It's only limited in supply not from the volume of the funds that we have available, because there are certainly sufficient funds available. It's limited in that the high street banks haven't quite grasped self-build fully. In fact, it's probably fair to say they haven't got it at all yet. The stable environment, as I've already highlighted, are building societies. Virgin Money's just joined the custom build market with us exclusively, which was brilliant news. It was announced in the government's white paper recently. But there's plenty of choice, plenty of lenders supporting this. It's a changing marketplace for those that have to borrow. The marketplace changed probably around 3 years ago now with the mortgage market review. You remember the dark days pre-credit crunch of self-certification, which probably led to some of the headaches that we experienced. We then had a simple income multiple process. You know, if you earn £50,000, you can get 4 times that. Well, I'm not sure how responsible that is either, because if you're earning £50,000 but spending 51, why should we give you another 4 times 50? it's just digging a deeper financial hole for people. There's a much more responsible model now where they look at your income source, they look at your outgoings that you have, whether that be school fees, loans, mortgage, rent, and at the bottom it will provide us with an affordable amount over a term of a period that you can repay. So this for me has been a much more responsible approach to lending. Good, thank you, thank you. This is a much more responsible route to lending. But it's a calculation that we go through. We can't just make that assumption that we're going to get 4 times our income. So we need to do this at a nice early stage and understand from that calculation what our borrowing is. It's certainly a more complex lending criteria. When you buy a house, we get a loan and we get the house. But for the self-build process, we need to understand affordability, so we calculate that. We need to understand your cash flow and your payment terms. When do people need paid? We need to understand your building method. Is it timber frame? Is it SIPS panel? Is it ICF? Is it traditional build? We need to understand what you're wrapping the building in. Is it a closed panel timber frame with a render board, with a render straight on, so there isn't a brick and block? We're going to use a slate or a tile roof, or we're going to have a sedum roof or zinc. Lots of modern methods of construction providing really attractive thermally efficient houses, but the lenders need to understand all of those components. We need to work out cash flows, so it's certainly more complex. So it's important that you're dealing with a specialist. And we need to understand the stage payment process, which is the difference between a traditional mortgage, where you get all the funds in day one, to a self-build mortgage, when the money comes in bite-sized chunks. So definitely specialist. Whoever you're dealing with, and we have a build loan as part of our group where we help support mortgage brokers throughout the UK to get access to our products, and we'll guide them and support them through that. But if they're not talking to you about cash flow and they're not talking to you about building systems and site insurance and warranty, maybe that it's not their specialised area. So please make sure you're dealing with someone who can offer that specialisation. So we know what the lenders look like, we know what the market looks like. It's building societies and a challenger bank. So what's the main considerations? It's how much can I borrow based on the land purchase, and how much of the build costs can I get? Well, again, post credit crunch, there's been huge strides forward. Lenders now, the vast majority are providing us with 85% of the money to buy the land, followed by 85% of the build costs. If you already own your site, which a number of you do, we're often getting 100% of build costs, which is less than 85 and 85 if you're buying the land and doing the build. One of the lenders is now giving us 95% of land and 95% of build costs. That can change the demographics of self-build. It doesn't have to be that middle-aged, retiring, second, third and fourth time house mover. There's the opportunity for first-time buyers. Why shouldn't the first-time buyers, young couples, get the opportunity to get onto the housing by building their own home? But importantly, it's not income multiples. We need to look at our income, pour it into the affordability model, look at our outgoings and manage them. So if you're employed, it's your gross income. If you're a sole trader, it's your pre-tax net profit. Need a minimum of 2 years. If you're a limited company director, it's salary plus dividends. And we need to look at what's coming out. So school fees, personal loans, credit cards. If you have credit cards with balances on them, please clear them. If you've got 0% that you're rolling over, please clear them. Because if you can't clear your credit cards, it might appear that you're already in a distressed situation to a lender. If you're using overdrafts, this is a nice time to stop using overdrafts, because if you're using an overdraft, are you already living beyond your means and having to dip into an overdraft facility? And anyone that's got a paunch, this is the Scottish Grand National today following the previous one, anyone for a paunch for online gambling, looks like a bit of an irresponsible spending pattern if it happens regularly. So you've got an opportunity to reduce some of those outgoings. Please do so, because it can improve your financial profile and improve your ability to borrow, because it's all now about responsible, affordable lending. So we know how we're going to borrow, we know what the lenders look towards. What we definitely need to get a handle on is what impacts in bringing the money to site, and how they work. Well, really quite simply, for those of you looking to buy a plot, the lender will release money to buy the plot, and in bite-sized chunks they will release funds to build the house. So land, a timber frame system will be foundations up to damp proof course. You're often packaging the frame and the windows with a provider like Scandia House, so it then goes straight to wind and watertight. First fix and plaster, which is your internals being laid out with the pipes sticking out and the electric sticking out, and then second fix and completion. And then your landscaping's part of that. So it comes in bite-sized chunks, and importantly, you only pay for the money as you take it in those bite-sized chunks. If you've arranged a £300,000 loan and you've taken £30,000 for stage one, you're making a mortgage payment on £30,000 whilst you've got a facility organised. You will only ever pay for the facility that you draw down, not what you've arranged. Hence it's important to build in contingency. So, depending on the project, 4 or 5 stages. And the products in terms of their design and what they do for us as self-builders, this is the key part now. We're moving into cash flow. There are only 3 types. Let's start with the short-term funding. I'm assuming that you're all self-building for your primary main residence. And if you are in that circumstance where you've got the big old house that's worth a reasonable amount of money, perhaps you've got a decent sized garden and you've split a bit of the garden, or you're buying a plot, then we can take a charge over the current house to release funds in stages to build a new one. Okay? It's not income based, it's asset based. But really important, because there are non-regulated development loans which can go on for 2 years. When it's for your primary main residence and or you're taking a charge over your current main residence, the funds are only available for 12 months because it's a regulated development loan. So that focuses the mind on a time period. That means the house needs to be built and you repay the loan with the sale of your current home. So of course, to manage those risks, having your house on the market at the beginning of the process is really important, because then you've got an active interest on it. There are rare occasions where an estate agent can actually have your property marketed for sale and you propose to rent it back from the buyer. Because if you're building in the garden, it's a building site next door. So if you have the potential to have the cash funds and rent it back from the buyer, it's a nice one. But certainly when you're looking at short-term funding, having 2 men in a white van at the end of the driveway laying bricks over a 12-month period could be a challenge. What it certainly leads itself to is off-site manufacturing like Scandia House, who can prepare much of the superstructure off-site and deliver and build quickly. You know, if you have a build programme of 6 or 9 months, then quite clearly you're in the house for 3 months and giving you time to sell the house that should have been getting marketed on day one anyway before you started the build. If you have some of your own funds, of course you can start the project with your own funds and borrowing at a later stage, so you need the funds for a much shorter period, giving you a greater time to sell your current home. So the short-term model is there, that's based on assets when we're approaching a perhaps in retirement, asset rich and income poor. The other 2 models have been around for quite some time. The arrears model has been around for many years, and the clue's in the name. You get the money after each stage. Lenders giving you 75 to 85% of the money to buy the plot, and then 75 to 85% of the value of the project as it works its way through. It's probably worthwhile focusing on, if we take an example of that, if you're buying a plot, and I'm going to keep this really easy for myself, for £100,000, and the lender will give us 85%, then you put in 15,000 of your own funds. The next stage is to put the foundations in. You need to pay for that. So if that's 20, 30, 40,000 pounds, that comes out your own funds. And you need to have the funds to pay for it. What happens is the valuer comes back out from the lender and revalues the site when you've completed that stage. You will get back not 85% of what you've spent at that stage, but 85% of the increase in value that you've put on the site by completing that stage. Now if the valuer comes out and says that's a beautiful set of foundations, but I don't have any walls yet, and I certainly don't have a house, so it's still worth £100,000, you get zero back. So that's potentially our first blip in terms of cash flow. And if we're using a Scandi House off-site produced manufacturing system, you should already have paid your 10% to design it, you should have paid your money to put it into manufacture, and you have another chunk of money to pay to have it delivered to site. So the cash flow's moved to the front end. So we need to understand that it is a valuation-based process, not a cost-based process. Now it must work because we do plenty of it. Well, to make it work, I think it's fair to say that there's an advantage of you already own the plot, because the lender that would have given you 85% to buy the plot can release 85,000 on day one from the plot value. So it injects some money. But we still need to get the site to increase in value. We've still got to put those footings in, we've still got to pay for the system. If we've got overspends and delays, we need to be sure that you've got enough to get you through to a point where there is sufficient value to release funds. We spoke early on about the advantages of having the money in the bank to ensure that you can pay everyone at the right time. As a self-builder, there are milestones in a project. We've spoke about them. Land, damp-proof course, wind and watertight, first fix and plaster, etc. But not all your payments will fall at milestones. Some of your tradespeople maybe want paid monthly. You certainly will be an attractive client for an electrician, plumber or tradespeople if you're saying, actually, I can pay you weekly. Because if the funds are there, guaranteed before the stage, and you have the ability to pay them, then they certainly will look forward to come back on the Monday because they know they're getting paid on the Friday again. If there's a discounted sale comes on, then you can take advantage of having the funds. These are the soft things. So your payments aren't only at milestones. There could be milestones monthly, weekly, or they could be daily. Because in mine's, I would have the painters and decorators saying, could you go down to the builder's merchant and get me some more materials? Having the funds when you need them is what makes this a really enjoyable and a smooth process. So the arrears models can work when there is plenty of funds available and or often you own the plot. But that wasn't everyone. So around 20 years ago in September this year, BuildStore designed what was called the Accelerator, which is an advanced stage payment mortgage. And it turned the process on its head because it removed it from being a valuation process we were wondering and hoping what the value would be, and turned it to a cost-based process. So if I use that simple exercise earlier, where I'm buying a plot for 100, I get 85% of the money to buy the plot. If my foundations are £20,000, they'll give us £17,000 before I start the work on the foundations. However, it will also bring the timber frame design and manufacturing process into the foundation stage of the build. Because when we're doing the founds, we need the house to be in manufacture so that it's ready when the foundations are completed. When we hit damp-proof course, you then get 85% of the next stage, based on the costs that you've told us, which has the system paid for and supplied and put on the house. And it means you've got funds there to pay everyone as they require paying. So the Accelerator model definitely transformed, and we've built over 20,000 houses with that particular process, and works well. It's about our advisors understanding your circumstances well enough to recommend with complete safety to mitigate the risk of you running out of funds or not having the funds available to pay your trades and professionals at the right time. Does that make sense? Yeah? It's the real key part to this, is knowing when you have your funds and having funds to take advantage of discounts, paying people in a timely fashion. The rear stage model, most lenders are 75 of land and build. We have a wide range. If you see the office I'm in is just along on the right hand side, and there's a pop-up with a wide range of lenders. And even on the rears based lending, we've got most of our lenders now up at 85% of land and 85% of build costs on the exclusive panel. The Accelerator, we've now got one of our lenders that says up at 95 of land and 95% of build, based on costs at the beginning of each stage. Really important. Positive cash flow. Now, as an organisation, we've been around for, say, 20 years doing this and specialising in it. Many of the lenders that lend in the self-build arena do so exclusively through BuildStore, because many of the processes that take place at BuildStore take care of that in terms of the packaging of the application to go to the lender, well packaged with all that required information. Doing the stage releases, supporting the stage release process, the build monitoring all the way through. It's not about organising a loan, it's about completing the build with the customer. So it's important that we're with you for the whole journey from start to completion of the build. We've got access to the whole of the market, because we also need to be able to look holistically at your circumstances, because it might be that there's a couple of unencumbered buy-to-lets. It might be there's a home with no mortgage on it. So the solution might lie in a couple of areas, not just one single solution. So it's important that we have the ability to advise across the boards. And it's quite interesting, because that's the first time that I've put anything to do with interest rates towards the end of the presentation. And it's not that I'm not interested in interest rates, because as a miserable Scotsman, I don't like spending any money I don't have to. But the interest rates are secondary to the cash flow. There's no point of us searching a table and finding the cheapest rate if the money doesn't arrive when it needs to be on site to pay people. So we start by getting the cash flow right with a range of lenders, and then we're finding the best interest rate from that range of lenders. Nothing to hide from you, the interest rates sit somewhere between 4% and 5.25% per annum in that arena. But as we do much of the design work around products and product innovation, our lenders during the construction phase provide us with a temporary concession of interest only during the build programme. So it might be 4.5%, but if you've taken 30,000 for foundations, you're making an interest only payment on 30,000. You then take your next stage and so on. So we're interest only during the build phase for the products. And again, a nice bit of product design, when you hit the practical completion certificate from the building regulations, then that same lender, most of them now will invite you to choose one of the residential products. Don't have to worry about remortgaging and having more fees and costs. The lenders will have what they call retention products and invite you to come off your self-build one for your long-term repayment strategy. For those of you using short-term funding, there's no exit fees on the products. So you're simply building, selling the old house and paying off the mortgage. The short-term funding, the monthly payment you don't make, it rolls into the loan. So nice product design, slightly higher interest rate, but interest only during the construction phase, which keeps the monthly cost down, helps from that affordability budgeting point of view, and then we're switching on to a residential rate longer term. We've got access to exclusive rear stage products, and of course the unique Accelerator mortgage, and lots of the lenders, it's an unusual phrase now, modern method of construction, it's off-site construction, but it is important. It's important for us to know the superstructure you're using, more important for us to know the external fabric of the building, because some lenders have an appetite for some external claddings and not for others. For example, timber clad top to bottom. It's certainly something they do in the Highlands and Islands and the West Coast. Architects are great, timber frame, timber clad top to bottom. We would lose some lenders who don't want timber clad top to bottom. But there's still plenty of lenders, so it's important that you let us know what your objectives are and the desire in terms of the palette of materials you're using, because it can influence the choice of lender that we would use. Higher borrowing, up to 95% on self-build. So to summarise the key points, where does the finance sit in the project, in the process? Well, it has to start at the beginning of it, not halfway through the build programme, not once your architect's designed a stunning 300 square metre house and you can only afford to build a 250 square metre house. So we start with the budget, and the budget allows us to calculate the cash flow based on knowing the system you're using and the payment terms. We're looking to focus on your cash flow to get that right, making sure you've got positive cash flow. It's not having the cash flow that makes that TV programme interesting. It's often not, it's not that they haven't borrowed enough, it's that they're not in control of when the funds have been released or didn't understand when the funds were being released. So that's the important part. We certainly will have access to much more products, exclusive lending. If you look at many of the magazines, they've often got a list of them. I think probably around 75% of them are exclusive to BuildStore Group, but we share them with brokers to give them access to those products. But please speak to us nice and early. And importantly, we will review holistically your circumstances. It's not just about the self-build plot. There may be other factors that you have in terms of assets or investments or property that allow us to put a really nice model together for a solution. It's important we know long term what your objectives are. So, thank you. A quick half-hour run through. This is some of the key areas of the organisation that I think is worth pointing out, because BuildStore are trying to support you as a customer from early in the process to the completion. It's okay. Plot Search is our land database with all the land having at least outline planning permission. There's no land on there without planning permission, and it's free to register. It's www.plotsearch.co.uk. You can register by area, put your budget in and it'll alert you. In fact, this morning I got my usual text, which is top of the plots, which gives us a range that are available just now that we feel are real value. BuildStore Mortgage Services is our team that look after giving you advice to make sure all this stuff works. Your mortgage option is our long-term stuff, so looking after buy-to-lets and remortgages and people buying houses, and importantly our development finance, because not everyone builds this as their main residence. Some people are doing this and selling them for profit. This is key, important. So BuildStore Insurance Services will ensure that you have sufficient site insurance and an appropriate warranty for your build, so that if something goes wrong, and it can, it's your responsibility as the self-builder. You're the employer of these tradespeople that are coming in, and it's important for you also understand who is the principal contractor. Now, if you're getting a turnkey solution, then it's often the principal contractor would be Scandia House. If it's been broken up into different parts, who takes that responsibility for health and safety? Your site insurance will give you employer and public liability insurance, and it also forms insurance for the building as it starts to take shape. Your warranty is then at completion becomes your 10-year insurance, and even those who don't need finance on the build, put a 10-year warranty in place, because you can't sell it within 10 years unless that's in place. And custom built homes is really interesting. It's a large emerging part of the market where rather than a single plot, we have someone who's put in enabling developer and private landowners. Because of the right to build legislation in England, the councils have got calls out for land, people can bring it forward, planning put in place, and it's a process where you're buying a plot where the roads and services are already taken care of. So much of the risks at the ground condition stage have been removed. The services are there, and you're choosing a supplier to put a house on that plot. So custom built homes are online estate agency, and you will find plots that are coming as part of a multiple rather than one-off plot. It's okay. 15 minutes. Perfect. I know that probably there isn't a chance for us to speak to everyone today, but my contact details are here. Please image them. My cards are here, and I've left everyone with a brochure. as I say, when do you deal with it? Right at the start, before you go into design, set the budget nice and early. Any questions? Which means I've confused the life out of you, or I've answered all your questions.